Charlotte is the newest 4-star added to Genshin Impact along with Furina in 4.2. I've seen a lot of concern and excitement for this character, and I wanted to weigh in with my honest thoughts after reviewing her a lot in the last couple days, as well as testing her out with a huge number of teams to find out if she's a character that is worth building for you. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. Starting off with her kit design, explanation, and pros and cons. She is a 4-star cryo healer who is a catalyst user. This means that all her attacks are infused with cryo. Her skill tags all enemies and has a tap and hold version just like Nahida does, but it's her burst that provides AoE healing to your entire party, as well as dealing cryo damage, as well as giving sustained healing in an AoE field and sustained cryo application as well. She has a passive that reduces her skill cooldown when enemies are defeated, and another passive that increases her healing bonus or cryo damage bonus depending on if there are Fontaine units or non-Fontaine units in the party. Neither of these passives really has a huge impact on Charlotte's build. You'll mostly focus on getting her as much attack as possible to max out her healing, as well as much energy recharge as required to burst off cooldown. That brings us to her major pro and major con, and she really has those, and they are both huge. Her major pro is she heals a ton. I really can't overstate just how much she heals. I truly believe that she is the biggest healer in the game when it comes to total party off-field healing. With just one tap of her burst, she instantly full heals the entire party no matter how low they are, at least from my testing. And then she provides continuous healing that keeps your team topped up for the entire duration of her burst. No matter how low your team goes, how much Furina drains your HP, or how much the enemy dogs or dancers bring your HP low, Charlotte is there to heal you back up to full. She has insane healing, but she does have two major cons, I guess I would say. Number one is relatively low damage because you have to build so much ER, which is her second con, to make her kit work. She is very, very energy hungry. Her burst is an 80 cost burst and her skill doesn't create all that many particles. That means unless you're getting multiple skills per rotation, which is not going to happen on most teams, or if you have a lot of Favonius weapons on your team, or if you have multiple cryo units, it's going to be hard to get her energy recharge. She does have some help to this with C4, but it's not a massive amount of energy recharge. You still need to build a ton. I built her with an energy recharge Sans and Favonius Codex, and I have her C4 unlocked, and it's not always enough energy recharge if there's no other cryo units or Favonius users on the team. And I even have about 30 energy recharge on my pieces, so a total of 227 ER. You basically need to just focus all of your artifact building on ER. And just as a point of interest, even though it doesn't really matter, I think I know why they gave her such huge energy problem. If they hadn't given her such crippling energy problems, she would have been able to use the Thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayer Catalyst, instantly making her a top tier healer support, because the vast majority of cryo characters scale off of attack and don't have access to Bennett if they're in freeze. And so this weapon would have been absolutely insane for her. Unfortunately, Hoyoverse didn't want to make a top tier character. They just wanted to make a solid character. And so they gated her energy recharge so high, so they forced you to use Favonius Codex. Fortunately, Favonius Codex is still a great weapon. Providing extra energy to the team is very useful. It's a weapon that you possibly might have run anyways, but it is really annoying that it makes her so difficult to build and that it reduces her options. For her build guide, you want to get as much ER as possible. That is priority one. Whether that means giving her the ER Sans, I would level up my Favonius Codex to 90. I will now because I need that every little extra bit of ER I need. Energy Recharge Sans, and on all the substats that you can muster, ER over everything else. You do also want to get some crit rate in there, so you may need to go with a crit rate circlet over an attack circlet if you can't get enough crit rate from your substats. I was able to get away with 30 crit rate and still have it proc Favonius often enough, but you might want to invest into more. Before even thinking about set bonuses, the number one thing you want to make sure you have is enough ER. You can go for the Prototype Amber. There's basically only two weapons that work for her. It's either going to be Prototype Amber or Favonius Codex. Generally, I'm just going to recommend Favonius Codex if it's available to you, because otherwise it's going to be hard to hit those energy recharge requirements. You don't need to 90 this character. You don't even need to fully ascend them. She scales off of attack, and all of her healing also scales off of attack. attack. So it can be worth it to take her to that final ascension to get more attack for more healing, but it is a bit of a resource sink. So if you can get away with just leaving her unascended for a while until you have more resources, that's going to be totally fine to do as well. Her talents, you want to focus on leveling up her burst. That's the one that heals. Her skill provides some damage, but it's not a crazy amount of damage. You are building attack, so you do get some damage, but because you have to focus so much on energy recharge and crit rate for Favonius, you're probably not going to get like a ton of crit damage, and you're probably not going to build cryo damage bonus, at least on teams with Furina, because you'd like more attack. But it obviously doesn't hurt to level up her skills. I would aim to get the burst up first, and then her skill, and then her normal attack, only if you're going to use her as an on-fielder. Again, really only 2 viable weapon choices, and even then you want to use Fab if you can. For artifact sets, if you don't have enough ER, I highly recommend the 2-piece Emblem of Severed Fates, because she really does nothing if you don't have your ER up. If you can get that, one of the best things you can do is get her on a tenacity build, which unfortunately she doesn't make use of the 2-piece set, but it gives a huge buff to your whole team. So as long as your team scales off of attack, the tenacity buff is very, very noticeable, and she's very, very good with it. I don't have tenacity pieces that scale with attack, so I'm using Noblesse. That's also a good option. And this does buff her own attack as well, so she gets extra healing from that, which is kind of nice. Ocean Hued Clam, also a good set for her. You can even use 2-piece Maiden's Beloved or something like that. Some more niche options, picking the Instructor set could be really good, especially if you are using her in a Hyperbloom team, which we'll talk about soon, or in a Melt team, which is not my favorite team for her, but definitely a good option to buff the team. It gives one of the biggest buffs. And you can consider an Exile set, because that gives the energy recharge and the elemental burst, and using the elemental burst regenerates the party energy as well. For main stats, I would focus on one of 2 builds. If you're building for teams that don't use Furina, you probably don't need to max out her attack. And so you can focus on more supportive sets like Instructors or something like that. You don't have to build attack, attack, attack. Or you could also focus on her own personal damage. You could build 2-piece Blizzard Strayer and use attack, cryo damage, crit. And you could use sets that like Blizzard Strayer that buff her own damage, or 2-piece Blizzard Strayer, 2-piece something else. That's if you're running a team without Furina. If you're running a team with Furina, it is recommended to focus more on getting her attack up. So I run her on ER, attack, attack. If you're not worried about buffing and or your team mostly scales off of HP and you want to max out her healing and you don't want to use Clam or something like that, you could use like a 2-piece attack set like Gladiators. There's lots of different options, and the best artifact set choice really depends on the team you're running and if you have enough ER or not. For Constellations, her C1 gives extra healing, her C2 gives extra attack, which means that she's going to get extra healing. Her C3 gives her leveled up burst, so also increased healing. Her C4 gives a little bit of energy regeneration. Her C5 just a little bit of damage, and C6 surprisingly is just more damage and actually more healing as well. So she's actually not a character that's super Constellation dependent, because her healing is so good. As long as you're willing to invest in those artifacts to get lots of ER and attack, then even just having C0 or early cons like C1 are going to be enough. And in the long run, having C4 is nice to get that little bit of extra ER. This really becomes more relevant on teams that she's running as solo cryo without too many other Favonius weapons on the team. I tested her both at C1 and at C4. I didn't notice a super massive difference, but even at C4, sometimes I didn't have enough ER. I think this is fine though, because as a 4-star healer, she is very competent. Like, she does so much healing, and it's more healing than Baiju, it's more healing than Kokomi, it's more healing than anyone in the game. She just instantly heals and full heals your whole team, which I'm okay with characters having a drawback. It's an annoying drawback, to be sure. It's definitely not ideal, and it may require you to invest in locking those, really looking at your artifacts and really rolling for pieces to have more ER. Obviously, I would prefer that she didn't have those massive ER issues, but it's not unworkable. It's not insurmountable. And once you can get past over that hump, she is a really good healer. So let's talk about teams. The number one thing I expect her to be is a staple unit for a lot of Furina teams. Not every single Furina team, because some teams don't want a cryo on the team, but teams that do synergize with cryo, I will always be picking Charlotte for that team. So whether that's a Novelette team, I think this is probably my favorite Novelette team. Well, I do prefer Kazuha over Sucrose. But one thing I forgot to mention, or I didn't quite formulate into words when I made my Furina guide, is that she gives so much damage percent that you can actually get away with running Sucrose much more easily and not notice the damage loss as much. Anyways, that's sort of a side tangent. But a team like this, or a team like this, the quality of life she brings to the team is really, really, really high. And this is any freeze team. You can obviously do Wriothesley, you can do Rosaria, you get it. It all works good. So Novelette teams, freeze teams. She's also a great choice for Hyper Bloom teams. If the team benefits, if the content you're fighting benefits from keeping the enemies frozen, her infused cryo attacks are honestly really, really nice for keeping the enemies frozen, keeping them in place, and it clears really, really well. Like Hyper Bloom at a baseline is so strong, and this is a team that you will definitely need to make sure you build into ER, but you don't need as much healing on, especially if you happen to use Kuki over Raiden. But either way, you don't need nearly as much healing, and you'll be able to use likely your skill multiple times your rotation, so it will lessen the ER requirements a bit, and you can focus on a more damaging build. You can go ER, crowd damage bonus, and maybe crit rate, and that way you'll get actually some more damage off your Charlotte. I was using her on my full healing build, and this team was clearing awesomely. Hyper Bloom is just such a strong core, and Charlotte is honestly a really, really comfy choice for the on-fielder. It might be my favorite variation of Hyper Fridge, I'm not gonna lie. It really feels a lot better than using Diona or Layla in this slot. So if you love Charlotte and you love seeing her normal attack animations, this is not a super cope team. It's actually solid. She can work on Eula teams, although generally will be outclassed by Mika because Mika provides the attack speed, and if you have high constellations, more buffing to Eula. But it's definitely an option if you don't have a high con Mika. Charlotte is generally just kind of smoother and comfier to play as well. Obviously, we talked about just virtually any Furina team. You put Charlotte plus Furina and 2 other units that do damage and have some sort of synergy with the team, and it's going to be amazing. Melt is a team that should work fine, but that I haven't particularly tested very much because, well, I don't play a ton of Melt, honestly. Melt Dilute comes to mind. Normally going to be using like Kaya and Rosaria and Bennett to melt his hits, or either Kaya or Rosaria to melt his hits. I don't know. Please, maybe someone let me know in the comments how the Melt teams have been working out for you people who actually play Melt. If you've been trying Charlotte on them, I imagine it's going to be fine, but not better than the other options because of lower damage. And you already have, the thing is, you already have Bennett as a healer, so it's hard to ever justify bringing along a second healer or a different healer aside from Bennett because you're losing out on Bennett, which if we have some HP scaling pyro characters, then I could see Charlotte getting some use in Melt teams. I actually really like her in double hydro with either Hu Tao or Yoimiya, and that is in particular on Furina variants, not on regular variants as much. On Furina variants, they feel every bit as good, if not better, than double hydro with Zhongli. Furina plus double hydro plus Charlotte is awesome. I actually really like Charlotte on Wander teams. Again, Mika's going to be better because he provides that attack speed buff, but Charlotte's extra cryo application makes like Wanderer freeze teams really, really nice. I talked about freeze already, but I don't want to forget Ganyu. Charlotte, Furina, Ganyu, Venti is a team that I wish I talked more about in my Furina video, but hey, it's here. When Morgana works, I actually expect this to be the best Morgana team. I haven't been able to test it. I don't even have Mona. But Furina's personal damage, her massive buffing, will actually help Venti a lot, and you can actually build him on attack damage percent crit build. He'll do a lot of damage. Charlotte will be doing some damage, and Ganyu will be buffed a lot from Furina. It's like she already didn't run Kazuha on this team, but now you get a bigger than Kazuha sized buff from Furina. You get the energy refund from Venti. This is gonna, I believe that this will be the strongest Morgana team, but I haven't tested it all that much. I've tested a little bit, but not all that much. When Morgana is actually good and I actually get Mona, then we'll be able to tell for sure. But certainly this, I mean, Kokomi Shenhe is probably a great variant as well. Let me know if you have Ganyu and you've tested Morgana, what you think of this team, how it compares. I know for sure it will be great. Will it be the best? That's much harder to say, but it will be great. And the final team I wanted to touch on is Mono Cryo. We have yet another alternative to Layla or Diona. This is another team that, again, you can get away with building her for a little bit more damage. This might be my favorite Mono Cryo variant. I did like it a lot. It's a bit more forgiving than the Layla variant because with Layla, if your shield breaks, then you get hit by big damage. You can easily like you might have to reset your chamber, whereas Charlotte's a lot more forgiving. As long as you have some health left, she can heal you back up to full. Her energy needs are also drastically reduced on this team, so it feels really nice. Oh, actually, I did want to quickly mention you can definitely use her on Burgeon as well, swapping out Toma, and there's gonna be some melts in there, some Burgeons in there. That's gonna be a great team too. She'll also reduce the gauge of burning so that you don't get as much burning and you get more Burgeons. Probably Xingqiu a little better than Yelan here for a bit more Hydra application, something like this. I tend to not like Burgeon as much as Hyper Bloom, but it's still a great option. Now versus others. Here's the... We've touched on a few comparisons. We've touched on Mika, but there's also Qiqi. There's also Diona. They don't even all fit on here. There's also Layla. All of these characters are 4-star defensive cryo units. What are they doing? Well, Qiqi's a 5-star technically, but a standard 5-star. What are they doing giving us so many defensive cryo units of all things? I was really not excited for Charlotte, by the way, when they first announced her and when I first realized she was a healer, because it's like, what am I going to do with another 4-star healer? But Charlotte really does carve out a niche in that her cryo application is way better than all the other characters, except for maybe Layla, but Layla shields. She doesn't heal. So Layla and Charlotte, I would say, have the least overlap, because if you want interruption resistance, you need to go with Layla. If you want healing, you need to go with Charlotte. They have the least overlap, and I think their roles are pretty clear when you're going to want one over the other. But versus Mika, Qiqi, and Diona, she has by far the best and most consistent cryo application and the biggest team heals. Mika has a bit more buffing, right? He provides attack speed and physical damage bonus and crit damage for physical when you're at a high constant, when you're at C6. But not all teams need those things. A lot of teams don't. Oh, I didn't do Yoimiya with Mika. I should try that. I need to do that. Qiqi provides some AoE healing, but only when she's on field. You have to spend time with her normal attacking, which can be totally fine for Hyper Bloom builds and things like that where she's on field. But when she's off field, you've either got to waste time getting some AoE heals, or you have to spend time with her skill on each character. It's not as big of healing. So, and she doesn't provide any energy particles, whereas at least Charlotte provides some. Overall, I'm definitely more of a fan of Charlotte, and Diona is like a hybrid. She's like the middle between Layla and Charlotte. She shields, but they're weaker than Layla's shields, and she heals, but they're not as good healing as Charlotte's. Often this is fine, you can get away with that, but especially on Furina teams, which is, let's be honest, the majority of things you're going to do with her, aside from maybe some Hyper Bloom or Burgeon stuff, or Mono Cryo, Furina is the main role, and Diona's healing is just not enough to keep up with Furina. Diona does provide the EM buff, but she's not used in all that many teams that actually utilize that buff. I could conceivably think of some situations where Diona might be better, but in most cases, Charlotte will be the choice. I think the main reason you build her is either you want to use her, you want to use Furina teams, and it opens up your team options for Furina very greatly. I think people haven't yet grasped how much damage Furina does and how much damage she gives to the team, and how worth it is putting a healer on your team that heals the way that Charlotte does. People don't realize, they're like, oh, it's like she's worse than Yelan and Xingqiu, and you also have to run a healer. It's like, you don't realize how much buffing she actually gives, how much damage she actually does when you have a competent healer on your team. It is totally worth it to build Charlotte for your Furina to have another option, at least in my opinion. I think the only time is if you're using Mika on those teams. If you already haven't invested Mika and you're using Mika a lot, and Mika works on those teams, then he is a great healer too. Like, he is a really, really competent healer. So if you already have a Mika well built, then I think that you can probably skip on building up your Charlotte. But I don't think there's that many people who've really invested in their Mika yet. For future prospects, I definitely think that throughout Fontaine, she's going to see her stocks go up and go down. I think more and more on-fielders are going to be released that work with Furina, and you're going to need more and more healers like Charlotte to keep up, and maybe not more and more healers, but you're going to need them even more as you want to build these teams. She's not always going to work on those teams, right? Cryo, for example, doesn't really work all that well with Electro, creating superconduct, so you're better off with an Anemo healer such as Jean. But in those times where Cryo is a good and useful element, Charlotte is your pick to go with Furina. I do also see them releasing more 5-star healers, or just more healers in general, potentially putting pulling Charlotte's value down, but it's really impossible to know until we actually see the future characters. And fortunately, she doesn't need like crazy high investment. The artifacts that she needs, you're going to be getting alongside other characters and other sets that you're building. Most characters don't want attack percent goblet and attack percent circlet and tons of ER in their stats. It's a different kind of artifact that you want to look out for as you're farming for other stuff. And it's not like you need to take her to level 90 for her to be good or something like that. So you don't need a ton of investment. You can just invest into her burst and not worry about the damage. So there's things that you can do to build her more cheaply, and so she's not as much of a resource drain for you. For overworld and aesthetic, I love her animations. The taking pictures animation is just like the greatest thing in the entire world. A catalyst that uses photography is just unbelievably cool. I love her voice lines so much. Great design. Great in overworld as well. Having a big heal for the overworld is really, really good. So yeah, overall, Charlotte, if you have Furina or if you have one of the other teams that I've shown here, if any of those look interesting to you, I definitely think she's a great build. Just make sure that you can get over those energy requirements. If you haven't yet watched my Furina guide, definitely check it out. I tested 52 teams with her. Again, subscribe if you want to help me out. It really does help support me and the family. And if you don't want to do any of that, that is totally fine. Just watching the video has been more than enough. Thanks so much. Bye for now.